and welcome to Hobby Maker Tutorials. I'm Janie and I'm from Janie's Originals, and in this video we're going to show you some of the tools that you will need and some of the things that you may want to help you on your journey in craft bookbinding. So what I've done is I've separated it down into things that I feel when you start bookbinding are things that you will definitely need, and a lot of these things will be things that you have as a craft already. I'll then show you not necessarily an alternative but other things that will help you but aren't absolutely necessary. It's the sort of thing that once you get into it, and I'm sure you probably will, they just make the journey easier for you. So let's get started with the basics. The first thing that you're going to need is a good cutting mat. Now, I always advise, excuse the glue on mine, it's very well used. I always advise having a self-healing cutting mat. A lot of us crafters work over the top of glass mats, which is perfect for mixed media, but because we're going to start doing cutting, I feel that a self-healing mat is a lot easier to use, it's a lot safer and more stable. So that is your first basic that you need. On top of that, should you wish to, we do something called a book hook as well. Now this is something, it is like a traditional bench hook. It literally hooks over the side of your bench, and what it does is it gives you your right angle, so that when you're measuring up, when you're folding, when you're cutting, it just gives you that guideline. You've got another little mat inserted into it, and this fits up to A4. Most of the books that we bind as craft binders are A5 or below. But this just helps you, like I've said, when you're folding, you've got a straight edge to work to, and when you're cutting as well, it just helps. That is the one thing that some people struggle slightly with, is the cutting. Once we start using our rulers, we can line them up to these guidelines here. That's your cutting base. We then need to use something to cut with, so we need a decent ruler. The ruler that I like to use is clear. It has a grid system on it, and it has a metal edge, so it kind of does everything in one for you. As I've said, you've got your measuring edge. I like the grid system because it helps you line things up, and if you're anything like me, you like to have things made slightly more simple. So when you're trying to get those straight edges, especially if you don't have the book hook and you're working over a mat, the guidelines on the mat and the guidelines on the ruler will help you. We also have this metal edge here, so this is perfect for when we're cutting with a blade, or if you start cutting fabrics and leather with a rotary cutter. While we're looking at rulers, an add-on that you can kind of use is a piercing ruler. Now I've got one here which almost looks like an invisible ruler because it's clear. In the same way, it has numbers across the top. It goes from 0 in the centre and works out in numbers. This one actually, I've put a little bit of ink on the numbers so it might be easier for you to see, but I'll still put my hand there so you can see these holes here. So this really is when you start to devise your own books. So if you're not using templates that we've done to help you in your piercing guides, this will help you along, so you can centralise your centre hole. You can count out without having to measure and having to divide your page sizes. You can literally count the numbers. We have little notches that enables you to put your awl in, so that you can pierce your holes accurately. And then what we've done is we've lined these up with the holes along the centre to help you with your spine. So that is kind of like your cutting base and the rulers that you may need to get you started. Another thing that I always advise having, and it's not even really a tool, is a piece of packing foam. Now I use packing foam. You could have some corrugated cardboard, kind of a few layers put together. The reason that I use this is as a piercing base. So when we're piercing holes that we stitch through, this just basically gives you some cushioning, and is something to put your piercing tool into. So even though I've got a lot of fancy kind of tools, I still reach for the packing foam, just as a cushion, as I said, for piercing. So while we're talking about piercing, you will need an awl or a pokey tool, as a lot of people call them. Now, when I say awl, we're not looking at the sort of DIY awls that you use. I find that they don't have such a sharp tip on them, and they're a lot wider. We don't want this bit to be too wide, because obviously we don't want the holes in our binding to be too open. They only really need to be the size of the needle that we're using. So that is a tool, like I said, you might have a pokey tool, as we call them, you might have a tailor's awl, anything like that is perfect. It's just for piercing the holes before we start doing our binding. And then an optional extra is something like a Japanese style screw punch. So I'll just open this one up for you to see. So if you start venturing into doing leather books especially, but also if you're using fabric spines and you need to pierce the spine, this actually makes a much cleaner cut than just using an awl. It isn't essential, but it just makes things easier. It comes with different size bits in there, so you can pierce holes everything from 1.5 millimeters to 4 millimeters. So I find these especially handy because I do a lot of binding into leather or leather spines. So once we've looked at the awl or the pokey tool, the piercing tool that you're using, as I mentioned, I tend to use packing foam, but what I also use is a cradle. So what this does is enables you to put your pages inside the cradle. It holds your pages open, and it just enables you to pierce straight down. So you'll see we have this little gap here, and it eliminates the pressure that you might need to get through the paper. So you don't need anywhere near as much pressure as you might think. Once you're piercing through, as long as you feel the pressure change and the tip of your awl comes through the back of the cradle, that is good enough. We don't need to be piercing all the way down, because the further you pierce, the larger the hole will become. Okay, so this just helps you line it up, going through the crease and coming out of the exact place that you want it to. So that just helps with your piercing. So talking about piercing, what we also need to do is fold our pages. Again, you'll see that these are very well loved, and they do have the addition of glue on them. So a bone folder. I tend to use a Teflon folder. It isn't essential when you're starting out. Anything that will help you fold your pages will work. You could even do it with an old credit card, something like that. It's just something to help you reinforce the crease when we're folding. So you can see I've got a variety here. Now traditionally they're still called bone folders, and traditionally they would be real bone. But these are plastic and this one is Teflon. The benefit with Teflon is it won't burnish your paper. So very often with plastics, if you are sweeping over your paper to help you do the fold, it may burnish and put a little bit of a shine on your paper. With Teflon, it won't do that. But to be honest, I tend to use all three depending on my project. You will find them in different lengths and different shapes. Essentially, they do the same thing. It's just what is most comfortable for you. Another thing that can be helpful for folding is a scoring tool. Also, depending on your project, you might prefer to use a scoreboard, but the scoring tool, if we were doing things like concertina folds, this just helps when you use your ruler on your paper. You can just help to score that line before you fold. Again, it gets a nice crisp line. If you're doing things like concertinas, you want to make sure that your folds are accurate. So that one there, which is the smallest ball on the end, and these actually are the same as you get for if you do your own nails, basically nail art. It's the same sort of thing. So again, anything that will give you that nice crease will be helpful. So looking at cutting, we've already spoken about the cutting mats and the rulers. Now you need a good knife. Now, some people like to use a scalpel. A lot of bookbinders you'll see using a scalpel. I actually prefer to use a safety knife. You can get them in various sizes. You can see these vary very slightly. I would stay away from the ones that are a lot larger than this, because I just think you have a lot more control. Now, the benefit with your safety knife is exactly that. You have the safety. You can bring the blade back in when you're not using it, and I would suggest that get into the habit of bringing the blade back in when you put it down on your work table, because they are very sharp. Talking about the sharpness as well, don't forget the little lines that are on these blades are to snap off your blade to keep them sharp. Now it makes a big difference to keep snapping off your blade. You'll notice the difference when you snap off a blade and use it on your paper. You will instantly notice the difference, so don't forget to be snapping those off. Now you have quite a large blade on there. It will take you quite a while to get through, but you might also want to get some spare blades. So they're just interchangeable. Once you get down to the end of this blade, the end comes off and you just pop a new blade in, you're good to go. Again, talking about cutting, if you're going to be cutting fabrics and or leather, I advise getting a rotary cutter. I think this one is a 29 centimetre. You can get them larger, but for the projects that we do, I prefer the smaller blade. Now, I wouldn't use this on paper. I would only use it on fabrics and leathers, and it gives you a really lovely clean cut. Again, you have a safety element on here. You just flip that back for the blade. Different versions may vary slightly, but they all tend to have this safety element on there. And then again, using your ruler with the metal edge, this is what you would cut against on your self-healing cutting mat, and it just gives you a really crisp cut. Okay, so looking at the binding itself, obviously we're going to need some needles. Now you might have needles in your own stash. The only thing you need to make sure is that the eye of the needle is big enough for the thread that we use. Often we use a pre-waxed thread. So if you were buying one of our kits, you'll have a pre-waxed thread in there. If you're making your own books, I generally suggest using something like an embroidery floss, because they come in all the colours you could ever want, and variegated threads are lovely as well, and we wax them. So as long as your needle is a good strong needle, you can get away with just using your straight needles when you start out. The curved needles here, this is really for when you progress to anything that has a linking stitch. So anything like a Coptic stitch, I tend to use them for a long stitch. So if you hear those words, Coptic stitch, link stitch, long stitch, those are the things that are easier with a curved needle. They can take a little bit of getting used to, but once you are used to doing it, they do make things a lot easier. I actually keep my needles in a little vintage cigarette case, so that I've got everything that I need just there. So we spoke about, very briefly, waxing thread. So if you are to do that, I like to do it with beeswax. So it's a lovely natural product. You can use candle wax if you wish, but I prefer to use the beeswax. Okay, so all you would do is run your thread over the top and coat it with your wax. The reason we do this is to bring all the fibres together. It makes it easier to work with and easier to tie the knot when you get to the end. Okay, so some of the other basic tools that you will probably already have lying around your craft room. Scissors. I tend to use a large pair and a small pair. Generally, for most of my work, I get on better with a large pair of scissors. The small ones, very sharp tip. These are good for cutting your threads, or more so if you're decorating your books and you want to get into little areas for your fussy cutting. Pencils. Obviously, we need to do some marking up occasionally, so when we're measuring for our piercing and for our cutting. So I advise using a mechanical pencil because I find them more accurate. In bookbinding, we do work in centimetres and millimetres, and I find because these have a nice small nib, they're much easier to use. I also keep with me some spare leads just in case they run out. Occasionally we make mistakes with our markings, which means we need an eraser. I also keep with me a glue eraser as well. So when we're gluing our boards, paper to board, fabric to board, occasionally we'll get an overspill of glue. Wait for it to dry, and these glue erasers generally get rid of that spillage for you. You may also find that you want to use some clips for your projects. Not essential, but sometimes it's easier to keep things in place. So they come in a variety of sizes and designs. Again, it's something you've probably got lying around the house. And again, something that you may want is just something to weight your pages down. So anything that has a little bit of weight to it. I've got an old vintage iron here, and this is just like a little block of marble. But anything with a little bit of weight to it will help keep things in place as you're binding. One essential thing is a really good glue. Now, whilst most bookbinders do just use PVA, when we're working with fine bookbinding, if we're using PVA or say starch paste, we will also press in between every stage. Now, I don't know about you, but as a crafter, I'm too impatient for that. So I like to have a glue which doesn't have that excess water in it, which means it eliminates the process of pressing your boards, pressing your fabric covered boards, anything like that that may have buckling because of the PVA having a lot of water. So the paper bindery glue, anything like this with a very low water content, we use it very sparingly. So if you've seen clips on YouTube or anywhere like that of bookbinders that are using quite a lot of glue, that tends to be a PVA and they'll be pressing their boards in between. This you use very sparingly, and I will put it on with some form of spatula. You can use a brush as well. So this is a flexible silicone spatula, but what I also like to use, and these are in a variety of sizes just here. We have a set of spatulas here. Again, not easy to see when it's white on white, but you'll see that we have a variation of sizes and angles. So these are really good for gluing up your boards. Another thing that is handy if you have something, again, it could be something like an old credit card. This is like a little kind of scraper spreader. If you're working on a larger project or like me, very impatient, that helps you either spread glue or flatten down your pages once you have glued them. A little bowl might be useful if you want to decant your glue in there and then use it straight from there with the spatula, but just in small amounts. Obviously, we don't want to waste glue. Now, talking of glue, it can be easy to get in a little bit of a mess. So I do always suggest having a cloth and a water sprayer next to you, because we're working with papers that we want to keep clean, but we're also working with glue. Just get into the habit of cleaning down your mat and any of your tools that might get a little bit sticky. Also, some low tack tape. Again, not essential, but you might find with different things it's handy, especially if you're using templates to work out your binding holes. This can help to secure things into place, and we'll talk about templates in just a second. The other thing that is helpful, especially if you are a little bit messy with your glue, is having some form of silicone mat. Also, if you've already got something like a glass mat, you could keep that next to your cutting mat, so you've got an easy clean down when you're spreading out your glue. So now to look at things that are non-essential but just make things easier if you're starting to do your own binding and working out your own books. So we do a series of what I call T-spacers. So these are cut from Perspex, and these are to measure out your spine widths. So if you imagine, let me just move those out of the way. If you imagine you're sticking down a board to, say, a fabric cover, once you've stuck your first board, you need to make sure that the second one is lining up. By popping this into where the board is, you can glue your next board. You know that they're level, and it's also spaced out your spine for you. Now, these work with our little spine templates as well. Kept in a little envelope just to keep them all together for you. And these come in a variety of sizes. So you can see we've got taller ones and shorter ones. So we can do everything from an A7 book to an A5. So what you would do is find the one that corresponds with your width of T-spacer. And you can see that this has a little gap either side, and that's to allow for the hinge of your spine. So it just means that you can start working out your own books, but still without doing all those measurements. If that's an area that you don't like doing, kind of dividing up your page heights and things like that, it's all kind of lined up for you. You just choose how you're going to bind as to which holes you need. Other templates that we do as well are things like full book templates. So this is the sort of thing that would be laid down onto a piece of leather. You would cut around it, you would pierce the holes, and this would be using the screw punch that we've already discussed. And again, it's all lined up for you, and down to simple ones just like this. So again, non-essential, but makes things easier for you if you're working out your own books but don't want to do those measurements. And lastly, this is a little corner cutting guide. So you'll see if you stay with us for our beginners tutorials that when we're covering with papers or fabrics onto board, we need to miter the corner. This little tool will just go over the corner of your board. You can slice off the excess and it gives you the perfect measurement for a lovely corner. So those are the things that you will need and may want. It does look like a lot of tools, but I think a lot of them are things that as crafters you will already have in your stash and you will already be using. There are things as well that you can make use of that do the same jobs. So basically these are the things that you will surround yourself with before you start your first project. So thank you for watching. I hope I've not put you off with all of that, but as I said, it's a lot of things that you'll already have to start you on your craft bookbinding journey. In our next video, we'll be having a look at how to make our first 3-hole pamphlet stitch notebook, and from there your journey can begin.